Evet, günün son oturumuna başlayalım izin verirseniz. Bu son oturumda iki konuşmacımız var yalnızca. Profesör Buğan Çandel ne yazık ki gelemedi. Bir sağlık sorunları nedeniyle bizimle değil. Nicole Fo yine son anda çıkan bir vize sorunu nedeniyle bizimle değil. Çevrim içi konuşması öngörülen Ötfried Höfe de katılmayacak. Onun için iki konuşmacımız var. Programda gördüğünüz Profesör Doktor Alexander Chumakov ve yarınki oturumda yer alan, aslında buraya kaydırdık, Richard Falk. Önce Profesör Richard Falk'la başlayacağız. I want to give you first a short CV of Professor Richard Falk. Then he will make his speech. Richard Falk is Albert Milbank Professor Emeritus of International Law at Princeton University, where he was an active member of the faculty for 40 years, Chair of Global Law, Faculty of Law at Queen University of Mary University, London, and co-director of its Center of Environmental Justice and Crime, Research Associate to the Orphan Center of the Global Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Fellow of the Tellus Institute. He directed the project on the global climate change, human security and democracy, and formerly served as a director of the North American group in the World Order Models Project. Between 2008 and 2013, Falk served as a UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Occupied Palestine. His most recent book, written in the collaboration with Hans von Sponeck, is Liberating the UN, Realism with Hope. See also Power Shift, Revisiting the Vietnam War, on the nuclear weapons, denuclearization, demilitarization, and disarmament. His book, This Endangered Planet, was selected by the journal Foreign Affairs as one of the 6 most influential books published in the last century to address the global issues. His memoir, Public Intellectual, The Life of a Citizen Pilgrim, received an award from the Global Policy Institute at Loyola Marymount University as the best book of the 2021. He has been nominated for the Nobel Prize several times since 2008. Please, you have the word, Professor Walk.
Thank you very much for those very gracious words of yes. Even thank you twice. Action. And it's for me a pleasure and an honor to be a participant in this 50th anniversary of the Philosophical Society of Turkey. And it was a pleasure to listen to the prior panel that showed a turn in philosophy toward engagement with the real issues of the world and the real issues confronting humanity. In my teaching life, I had been amid philosophers who were considered very eminent in their fields, but they were distanced from the world. They were preoccupied with questions of language usage and analytical fine points deriving from the Wittgenstein style of assessment. And it was, to me, an evasion of the real concerns that should be guiding the deepest thinking that humanity is capable of. And I had, as a student, always associated philosophy with that quality of providing a sanctuary, an academic sanctuary for deep thinking. And I come to this conference not as a philosopher, but as one who has devoted a lot of my energy to what Professor McBride spoke about at the end of his remarks. That is, what are the conditions for a peaceful world? And I approached these challenges partly as a student of law and international relations, and partly as a critic of the way in which my country, the US, was handling the power at its disposal, the power that could be used for a better human future, or it could be used to exploit more vulnerable peoples and to engage in destructive warfare. And I was personally very influenced by my engagement with the opposition to the Vietnam War, which for me was a personally transformative experience. So this is an opportunity that I chose to direct at what has been an important theme of my recent writing and thinking, aside from trying to react to contemporary issues, which is that of global governance and global security. That is, how do we manage the interactions of states and people in a world without a government? And that's long challenged deep thinking, including that emanates from philosophy. And I was struck in a, I suppose, rather negative way by thinking about adjustments to making the transition to something that was viable and sustainable over a long run. It seems to me not only do we have to think of the contractions of space that make the imagery of a unified humanity more of an existential reality, but we also have to think that we're living at an unprecedented, a time of what I would call species urgency. And it's a question whether we have time to be distracted by Ukraine and other issues that are very troubling and profound, including the alignment of liberal democracies with a transparent performance of genocide, something that has never occurred previously in the world, that the liberal democracies might not have responded very nobly to the Holocaust or to Rwanda or Myanmar. But what they haven't done before is to actively be complicit in the crimes that were being committed at the expense of a totally vulnerable people. And that's a shameless moment in the experience, the narrative of how democratic societies have evolved in this time of planetary crisis. So against that background, let me present in a very condensed form my thoughts on global governance and global security in the 21st century. The existing structures and procedures of governance have their normative and political deep roots in the framework set forth in the Peace of Westphalia back in 1648, but continuously evolved to adapt to changed conditions and to the radical differences in technology, communications, digitalization, and now faced not only with the shadows cast by nuclear weapons, but also by artificial intelligence and robotics, a great number of technologically grounded challenges to what was understood to be the progress of modernity. The essential feature of the Westphalian framework was the autonomy of territorial states that would be recognized as sovereign within their international borders. And this is a condition of philosophical anarchy, most influentially theorized by Thomas Hobbes in the Leviathan, published in 1651. A contemporary international relations theorist, Hedley Bull, modernized Hobbes in his important book, The Anarchical Society, a study of order, which was published in 1977. The originality of Bull's adherence to a state-centric world was his idea that anarchy could be connected with the overarching non-governmental normative reality of society. Revealingly, the main societal premise of Bull's worldview was the political and moral obligation of sovereign governments to show respect for the norm of non-intervention by refraining from forcible interference in the internal affairs of foreign countries. The realist element in Bull's approach was expressed by his rejection of the possibility of international law as a higher law in matters of global security, that is, in the area of war prevention and the reaction to severe infractions of human rights. He tended to absolutize national legal authority when it came to maintaining global security or establishing and upholding political order. Bull illustrated his reluctance to submit power to law within international settings by his firm and in some sense shocking rejection of the Nuremberg precedent by which German political and military officials were held internationally accountable after World War II for their alleged criminality. Bull believed, and experience has largely vindicated his skepticism, that such punitive treatment as imposed on the losers in World War II made a mockery of law by overriding only the sovereignty of the losers and allowing the winners to enjoy the benefits of impunity. This unwilling behavior to make legal assessments above the sovereign state meant that what was being called law at Nuremberg is more properly understood as an expression of sheer power. At the same time, Bull valued for its functional roles the contributions of law in serving the mutual and reciprocal interests of states in political order internationally. But he believed that law had no constructive role in relation to war-peace contexts other than shared humanitarian concerns like the treatment of prisoners or the avoidance of unnecessary civilian casualties. In effect, the Nuremberg judgment was more an exercise of state propaganda by the winners in World War II than an advance in the criminal jurisprudence of international accountability. In effect, war was accepted as embedded in the anarchic structures of international society, and it was leading in the extreme to regard international life as governed by law rather than as a creature of power. Bull's deconstruction of Nuremberg accountability claims has been reinforced by bringing criminal law more recently to punish Saddam Hussein after the Iraq War of 2003, while foregoing any legal scrutiny of serious war crimes allegations directed at George W. Bush or Tony Blair. Also significant is the reality that these procedures of global governance that originated in the West and served Western interests in overriding the sovereignty of non-Western national societies by disguising power grabs as criminal justice. At its peak, this Western hegemony both had recourse to law as an apologetic source for apologetic rationalization of colonialization and colonialism, and often to sugarcoat the genocidal side effects that were directed toward native populations, especially in the British breakaway colonies in North America, Australia, and New Zealand. Above all, the US government enjoyed complete impunity, even in relation to the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that were viewed as unlawful in more objective legal and cultural venues. We can only deeply regret that this practice of impunity for the atomic attacks cleared the path to the nuclear age that might not have come to pass if Germany or Japan had resorted to such weaponry and yet went on to lose the war. In other words, the winners of a major war also shape the peace that comes from that war. And in the case of nuclear weapons, it made those weapons legitimate for the more powerful countries in the world. And that might not have happened had the Germans beat the US essentially in the race toward having atomic weapons. An earlier philosophical break came to the fore in the aftermath of the French Revolution, articulated in perhaps the most conceptually sophisticated manner by Immanuel Kant in his publication of 230 years ago of a long essay given the provocative title of Perpetual Peace, a Philosophical Sketch. The basic Kantian insight was that the global spread of democratic republicanism that he believed would flow from the French Revolution and the accompanying human rights would allow separate sovereign states to coexist in a condition of natural harmony with respect to their national security. Kant sought to counter the structure of political realism associated with perpetual war with the revolutionary idea that war was not rooted in the human condition or even the fragmented character of international society, but is an outgrowth of ideological tensions and the newly comforting belief that democracies would not wage war against each other. There were other related features in this Kantian hopeful view of international relations, including a self-interested dynamic in demilitarization. It is arguable that the Kantian radical vision has never been tested historically because of the failure of a genuine democracy to spread to many important countries outside of the West and to be quite seriously compromised in the countries that are in the West. And the anti-democratic national governments remain prominent even in Europe, and the source of both world wars of the prior century that were often described as pitting the liberal democracies against first fascism and then totalitarian socialism has not produced any lasting wave of democratization around the world as was hoped for after World War II. With the rise of civilizational consciousness, conflict configurations are often portrayed by reference to religious or ethnic identity. Biden is but the latest Western leader who sought to rally democracies against autocracies, although his designation of democracy was so broadened and self-serving as to be normatively incoherent and meaningless, as he included Israel, Modi's India, Saudi Arabia, and other countries that could not claim national governance of a democratic sort. There remains a slender basis for the Kantian belief that genuine democracies would not fight one another, and that if the global political landscape were to one day consist only of genuine democracies, there might be a prolonged period of world peace. From pre-Westphalian times, contrary expectations envisioned an enhanced role for international law, entertaining political and ethical notions of overcoming Hobbesian anarchy by various institutional centralizations expressive of various ideas of spontaneous or coerced unity of humanity, generating even governmental proposals for world government or geopolitical ambitions to establish a global state, which to some degree has the United States attempted to do after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when it has filled the geopolitical vacuum in a way that established a non-territorial system of global governance for the world, but one which has also provoked defiant reactions, first from the other two geopolitical actors, China and Russia, and also from the global South that feel that it increasingly expresses the view that the US leadership in the world does not serve their interests in the 21st century. What now exists, epitomized by the design of the UN as an institutional, non-governmental system in which all sovereign states are treated as equal in a formal diplomatic sense, yet the five main prevailing states in World War II, back 80 years ago, enjoy a right of veto in the Security Council, the only UN political organ with the authority to reach binding decisions. In effect, this has meant that global security is managed outside the UN by these powerful political actors who possess the legal authority to evade the UN Charter while pursuing either peacekeeping or strategic interests. In fact, this P5 managerial role, produced during 40 years of Cold War, led to a precarious balance between the Soviet Union and the 3 NATO members of the Security Council, led by the US with respect to major war. Since the Soviet collapse and the end of the Cold War, this geopolitical P2 became behaviorally P1 until Russia mounted this challenge as a byproduct of the Ukrainian war. The Ukrainian war also highlighted the moral hypocrisy of the West by its denunciation of Russia while actively supporting Israel in carrying out genocide in Gaza, which also exhibited a betrayal of liberal values associated with respect for international law in this clash with strategic interests and cultural affinities. In other words, the moral hypocrisy leads to double standards that undermine any claim that international law has moral coherence and integrity, and is used as a policy instrument rather than as a way of regulating behavior. After each of the world wars, idealists on the sideline of world politics put forward views that advocated world government in the form of the enactment of a federalist constitutional framework providing global governance. Such views never gained political traction against either the realist consensus that dominates foreign policy elites in the powerful countries of the world, or through public advocacy by national citizenries. These ideas of centralized governance continued to languish despite the advent of nuclear weapons, the climate crisis, and the wastefulness and menace of militarized global security in the nuclear age. The UN was framed to create an institutional centralization for functional activities while settling for geopolitical management of war prevention and global security. And it should therefore come as no surprise that the UN has been minimally involved in the ongoing war in Ukraine and the genocidal assault in Gaza. It has played the role of spectator, basically. In recent days, the UN Summit of the Future, with its call for virtuous behavior, protective of long-term human well-being and ecological stability by UN members, and along with championing or inspiring policies directed at mitigating human suffering, seems likely to experience the disappointing destiny of the UN preamble to the Charter, which made confident calls to end the scourge of war and serve as a beacon of hope for a future, for a peaceful future, and was unable to make these satisfying words resound with a pacifying impact, because it couldn't match deeds to these words, since it left the geopolitical actors at liberty to pursue their own strategic interests. In that sense, the UN offered the world a beautiful wine bottle that lacks the coveted liquid within. We live in a disillusioning time where the appeals of 21st century pragmatic thinkers are still dismissed as visionary and are neither heard nor heeded in the corridors of power. Still mainly the preserve of ambitious men, and I stress men, who remain bewitched by the benefits of short-term performances, while the profound challenges that haunt the human future increasingly depend on long-termism of vision, commitment, empathy, and action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Falk, for speech. And if you let us, we take the question after the second presentation. Now we are coming to the second presentation. İkinci konuşmacımız Alexander Chumakov. I will give a short CV. And Alexander Chumakov is Doctor of Science, Philosophy, Professor of the Lomonosov Moscow State University, Editor-in-Chief of Age of Globalization Journal, member of the Presidium of the Russian Ecology Academy, leading research fellow at the Institute of Philosophy of the Russian Academy of Sciences, General Secretary of the Philosophical Society of USSR, first Vice President of the Russian Philosophical Society. Having graduated from an oil college, he worked as a foreman in the oil industry and then the nuclear test sites in the Semipalansky and Nova Zemblia. He received MA and PhD in philosophy at the Department of Philosophy of the Moscow State University, his PhD dissertation on social ecology, and postdoctoral dissertation dedicated to social and philosophical aspects of global problems were among the first research projects done in the newest field of science, global studies. More than 40 years, he has been studying such topics as philosophy of globalization and global problems, scientific and technological progress, transition to democracy and open society, social philosophy and ecology. He participated in and was one of the main organizers of the All-Russian Philosophical Congress and participated a lot of World Congress. I will say, 7 World Congress. You were also in Rome? Yeah, okay. Chumakov is the author of the idea and editor of Global Studies Encyclopedia, Global Studies International Encyclopedic Dictionary, and Global Studies Directory, People, Organization, and Publication. He is editor of the many scholarly volumes and textbooks, the author of the more than 800 research work, and it's unbelievable, and more than 60 monographs and textbooks published in Russian, English, Chinese, German, and other languages. In 2015, Alexander Chumakov became a recipient of the International Gusi Peace Prize. And as far as I know, your title is The Global World as the Newest Topic of the Modern Philosophy. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Distinguished President of the Philosophical Society of Turkey, Professor Ioana Kuchuradi, distinguished members of the Philosophical Society of Turkey, I thank you for the invitation and the honor you have given me to speak at such a representative forum on the 50th anniversary of your philosophical society. On behalf of the Russian philosophers, I would like to cordially congratulate you on this wonderful event. You are celebrating this symbolic date with very good results, among which, in particular, the memorable 21st World Philosophical Congress held in Istanbul in 2003. Then, on the initiative of Turkish philosophers and above all, the president of the International Federation of Philosophical Society, the outstanding and world-famous philosophers Ioana Cucciarati, the theme of philosophy facing world problems was put in the center of attention of the entire Congress. More than 20 years have passed since then, and today this conference is not coincidentally devoted to the same topic again. The fact is that the 21st century makes this problem extremely relevant and requires its solution even more urgently. But as the Chinese proverb says, if you have a problem, where should you start solving it? You should start talking about it. And it is quite obvious that such extremely complex issues cannot be discussed without philosophy. That is why global topics have been increasingly important in the program of such congresses since 19th World Congress of Philosophy in Brighton. 3 former and now honorary presidents of the International Federation of Philosophical Society, world-famous philosophers and outstanding organizers of science are present at this conference. Ioana Cucciarati, William McBride, and Lucas Carantina. And we must express our deep gratitude to them for the fact that they have personally done a lot to make philosophy face the world's problems. It is important to emphasize this since back in 1968, the well-known Club of Rome called on the world community to unite in order to counter global threats with joint efforts. But it took another 35 years of active interdisciplinary research for solutions to such problems for this topic to become a priority for philosophy as well. This happened in full measure, as already mentioned above, in 2003 at the Philosophical Congress in Istanbul. Then, for the first time in the history of such congresses, global issues were directly and indirectly reflected in most of the reports and discussions. And Russian philosophers arrived at this Congress on a specially chartered philosophical ship and brought the Encyclopedia of Global Studies published for the first time in English and in Russian. The first presentation of these reference publications, the authors of which were 445 leading scientists from 28 countries of the world, was also held there with great success. It is important to note that at the Congress in Istanbul, philosophy turned its face to global research and gave it a new dimension, the humanitarian one. At the same time, the ideas of cosmopolitanism originating from antique received a new understanding, supplemented by such concepts as global worldview, global thinking, global ethics, etc. Since then, to the entire philosophical problems of existing, consciousness, the meaning of life, and other questions constantly discussed in philosophy, the 21st century added a fundamentally new, never before existing philosophical theme: globalization and global peace. And in a more general sense, the theme of the single destiny of humanity and the preservation of life on Earth. And this is quite natural, since the new era required a new philosophy, new ethics, resistment of the value system, and finally a new paradigm of thinking. From this point of view, it must be recognized that being a natural process, globalization in itself is neither good or bad. At the same time, it is different effects on different nations. However, the issue here is not globalization as such, but the socio-political and economic structure of modern humanity, its disunity and uneven development. Likewise, cosmopolitan ideas are not someone's machination, but a natural and necessary conditions for the coexistence of different people in a global world. Consequently, we must fight not against globalization and cosmopolitanism as is often the case in the modern world, but against the existing vicious world order and unfair relations in society. So the problem is that the modern world in the 21st century remains divided into national apartments, where sovereign states continue to zealously defend their independence. At the same time, the world community, which already numbers more than 8 billion people under the influence of globalization, is increasingly becoming a single, integral system, and there are no mechanisms for managing this qualitatively changed world. Undoubtedly, this is the main contradictions of the modern era. And we must admit that the situation that has arisen will not resolve itself, because at its core, it has an ideological, spiritual crisis, in overcoming which philosophy has a special role. The result of the latest 21st World Philosophical Congress held this year in Rome only confirmed these conclusions. Indeed, how that international contradictions have become extremely acute, humanity is actually balancing on the brink of a new world war and nuclear apocalypse. At the same time, numerous subjects of international relations, in the absence of an external force capable of regulating their relations, objectively find themselves in a situation of war of all against all. The difference between the current situation and the one that Thomas Hobbes spoke about in his famous work Leviathan is only that now, in the universal confrontation, there are no longer separate individuals, but numerous subjects of international relations, which are national states and all sorts of international structures and organizations. And this is happening no longer at the local level, but on a planetary scale. However, all these are consequences of the globalization of contradictory social relations, while the true causes should be thought in the cultural and civilizational differences in individual countries and peoples. Moreover, in the context of globalizations, their differences are becoming decisive on a planetary scale, as well as key in understanding the nature of the above-mentioned global contradictions. Hence, previous approaches to the analysis of modern world problems based only on cultural or civilizational differences proved to be ineffective. Thus, in an effort to understand the nature of modern conflicts, one must turn to the foundations of human nature and society, taking into account the differences in culture, traditions, and beliefs of individual peoples. From this point of view, the fundamental differences between East and West, the global North and global South, the military conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the tight knot of permanent contradiction in the Middle East, the geopolitical contradictions between China and the West, the India-Pakistan conflict, etc., etc. All these are consequences of more fundamental reasons, which are contained in the discrepancy and clash of various cultural and civilizational systems, where economic or geopolitical aspects are only an integral part of such discrepancy. For the same reason, the policy of multiculturalism fails practically everywhere where they try to implement it in practice without taking into account fundamental cultural and civilization differences. Thus, now the global processes have covered all spheres of public life. A new view of history, culture, civilization is needed, namely a cultural civilization, cultural civilizational one, where there are many cultures but one civilization. This approach is not the only possible one, but its advantage is that it focuses attention on the unity of the cultural and civilizational development of any society. At the same time, it is important to emphasize that cultural diversity, together with the general norms of civilizational development, make each social organism unique, immutable cultural and civilizational system. Here, it is important to emphasize that the unprecedented world cultural and civilizational system that is being formed in this way does not at all eliminate the individual center and forms of manifestation of civilization that have formed naturally, just as it does not cancel the diversity of original natural culture, but grows out of them, forming a unique integrity that has no analogies in history. At the same time, the new global cultural and civilizational formation persistently demands that various types of local and regional cultural and civilizational systems that have developed in the conditions of fragmented world comply with the same norms, rules, prohibitions, regulations, etc., for all of humanity. In such situation, philosophy, of course, cannot remain indifferent, absorbing all these from the sidelines. Moreover, without philosophy, the solution to such problem does not seem possible, and first of all because a general comprehensive vision of the entire situation as a whole is necessary, which only philosophy can provide. Thus, in global studies, the task of philosophy is not to directly consider specific or technical aspects of globalization, but to provide an ideological, methodological, cultural, ethical basis for the corresponding decisions on the part of other sciences. In this regard, the main functions of philosophy in global studies can be defined as follows. Firstly, philosophy, by forming a worldview, sets certain value systems that largely determine the direction of human activity. Secondly, philosophy provides a holistic view of complex systems, develops a language of interdisciplinary communication, and thus contributes to the integration of scientists' knowledge. Thirdly, philosophy in the study of global processes aimed at understanding them as natural phenomenon and considers the emergence of global problems as an objective process of contradictory development of human history. Fourthly, from a philosophical point of view, it is possible to see the general trends of development of global processes as well as the dynamics of interaction of global problems and the interdependence in which they are. Fifthly, philosophy performs a cultural functions and also raises questions about the meaning of human life, death, and immorality, which in the face of the threats from global problems acquires special significance and relevance. The implementation of these philosophical principles is absolutely necessary for global research to be effective and for our world to become more stable and human. However, if we are realistic, we must admit that the historical process will not proceed smoothly in the 21st century either, because cultures have always been and will be different. Culture as such will continue to not only isolate, but also separate people, while civilization initially carries a unifying principle. Hence, disagreement and contradictions will continue to accompany the world community in which various cultural and civilizational systems will certainly not only cooperate but also compete and confront. To promote cooperation and unity of people, and also if not eliminate, then at least mitigate the negative consequences of disagreement and contradictions is precisely what the new field of scientific research, global studies, as well as humanitarian knowledge in general and philosophy above all, should do to the best of its ability. In conclusion of my speech, as befits the occasion. In gratitude for that first presentation of the Encyclopedia Global Studies at the Congress in Istanbul in 2003, I would like to donate both this volume of this now rare edition to Turkish Philosophical Society. If you don't mind, of course. That is why. Please, this is an English edition. 2003 was presented in Istanbul. It's English. This is Russian edition. Some bigger. Yes. This.
Thank you.
Like remember, and also the last, this book, Philosophy of Globalization. It is very interesting for you, will be because preface 4 words here. 3 famous philosophers, Ioana Cucciorati, William McBride, and Lucas Carantina in this book. The same. Thank you for them. The Philosophical Society. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jumako, for your presentation, also for the books for our society. Thank you very much.
Yes. I hope you'll continue our communication
we'll be
and cooperation.
Okay. We don't have much time for discussion, but we have only 10 minutes. If you have any question or comment, we will be happy to get them. Please. Yasemin, you have the floor.
My question is for Professor Falk. I would like to hear your opinion about United Nations in the scheme you presented. Do you think United Nations, either in its present situation or with some alterations, like changing the Security Council and abolishing the veto chance of the 5. Do you think it can assume a role in this globally governed world, or do you think it has historical baggage and it's completely changed and another structure should govern the world, a newly maybe structured organization? This is my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin, for that question, which I confronted in this book that was just published called Liberating the UN, Realism with Hope. The core obstacle to making the UN work in the war prevention context is the operation of the veto, which itself is an expression of the intention to make the UN weak when it comes to war prevention and severe human rights. And to change the UN requires these 5 countries to be willing to act for the sake of the global interest rather than for their own geopolitical and strategic ambition. And there's no evidence that any of the 5, except possibly China, are so disposed at the present time. So there isn't much hope, but maybe the other part of your question, that the Global South has increasingly tried to form alternate structures to that of the UN. And the BRICS is one important growing framework for developing especially economic policy. And China has set up a group of cooperative development actors and frameworks that gives an alternative to the Bretton Woods, IMF, World Bank structures. And one can maybe see some kind of interaction, that the big powers will be threatened by this alternate formation of a global structure. But the deep problem that exists at the present time is that there's no visionary leadership that can provide a pragmatic way of moving toward some kind of effective global governance structure, whether it's within the UN or outside the UN, or some complementarity between the two. And so without some kind of public mobilization from below, I see no prospect for producing the kind of global governance that the world really needs at the present time.
Any other question, Professor Oba, please?
I will not, perhaps I will make a comment with regard to the presentation of Professor Falk. You said that a leading person for changing this actual UN system. Yes, we had seen, for example, President Wilson, who introduced the UN system, the integration system in the world affair, but this system has not been accepted by his own country, as you know. In my opinion, I don't know whether this will be true or not. I would like to have your comment. A very important development in world affairs, unfortunately, and explode tactic nuclear weapons that will kill enormous people, or a clashes that will show us that indeed the world is going a very difficult situation. This influence coming from the world public opinion could oblige the decision maker, 5 states, or the most important states of the world, to change the UN system and to take into consideration the interests of the global South. What do you think about this comment?
Well, it's an interesting conjecture on your part, and in a sense, all of the major reforms internationally have occurred as post-war phenomena, going back to the Peace of Westphalia that arose out of the religious wars in Europe, and forward to World War I and World War II. So there is that sense that catastrophe creates a public mood that demands some kind of more effective war prevention structure and procedures. The problem has been that the most influential political elites don't trust that kind of collaborative world system, and they prefer what happened during the Cold War, that is, a realist balance of power between contending forces. And so they may speak about creating a post-tactical nuclear war experience, but I don't think the elite political will is sufficiently oriented toward that kind of adjustment. And I don't think the public, the peoples of the world, are sufficiently mobilized. Now, that may all change in the context of a collective world tragedy, but whether that happens, I hope the tactical nuclear war never happens, but if it should happen, one can see either the scenario of innovation taking precedence, or one can see what the League of Nations and the UN did, which was to promise something, but then design an organization without the capabilities of implementing the promise. See, and that's where we're caught between the contradiction in the domain of rhetoric and the domain of behavior. And that is a real philosophical challenge. How does one make rhetoric responsive to the global problematique? How does one make that a practical existential reality? And philosophical reflection can perform a valuable service in that regard.
Okay, I think it is the time to close. We must be so tired all day. And we thank you both for both speakers, Professor Falk and Professor Chumako.
I think there is one person.
One more question. Please, Yusuf Çatıkseken, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Ben Türkçe soracağım. Çevirecekler arkadaşlar. Benim alanım Türk Dili ve Edebiyatı ama iyi bir felsefe okuru olduğumu düşünebilirsiniz. Betül Hanım kitaplarını okuduğumu söylemek galiba yeterli bir kanıt olabilir. Benim şöyle bir sorunum var. Belki hepimizin sorunu. Devlet adamları, devlet adamları ve siyasetçiler nedense felsefecilere pek yakınlık duymuyorlar. Onları kendi kadrolarında yeterince işlendirmiyorlar, istihdam etmiyorlar. Onu acaba diyorum, merak ediyorum. 25. Dünya Felsefe Kongresi'nde de bulunduk. Orada da bir devlet adamı ve siyasetçi görmedim. Burada da sabahleyin devlet memurları vardı ama devlet adamı sayıları çok azdır kuşkusuz. Ama siyasetçilerden de sağdan soldan hiç önemli değil. Hiç kimse yoktu. Acaba Siyasetçileri, devlet adamları, siyasetçiler, filozofları çok mu marjinal buluyorlar, çok mu ütopik buluyorlar? Neden onlara yeterince gerekli, kendilerine yararlı olabilecek zamanı, ortamı ve görevi vermiyorlar? Siz bu konuda ne düşünüyorsunuz? Her iki değerli filozofu da sormak istiyorum. Çok teşekkür ederim.
Let him go first.
Yes, it's a very important question. I spoke about task and role of philosophy and philosophies in nowadays. But I think we must connect your question with the conversation which we have some in previously discussions. I think that we live in a different time than in 1945. Different, very different. And when United Nations was created, it was organizations which have task to prevent new world war, nuclear war. And then was around the world 2 billion population. And today it's more than 8 billion population. Then was aeroplane on a military aeroplane. Now we have here because civil airplanes and so on and so on. Globalization now different than then. And that is why this organization, United Nations, can only regulation, not good, but regulation, relationship around the world. But we need today, it is not enough for our situation, only regulation. We need governance. We need management this world. My colleague says about global governance, but what does it mean? My question maybe not for today, but maybe after when we finish this meeting, we must thinking more carefully about what does mean global governance. In my opinion, in my works, I think it's impossible. It's impossible in such way as we have, for example, nation states governance. Such way, no, impossible. No global governance, it's empty talking. We must looking for another way. Unfortunately, not so many time to speak about this one. That is philosophies. I return to your question especially. Philosophy is very important to have task to give as can many people worldview global thinking. And we must teach our students to thinking globally and to be responsible not for only ourselves, for our country, for all humanity. Unfortunately, we see now how many countries looking for their national interesting and national ideas and so on, so on, so on, so on, so on. Without philosophy, these tasks have no solution. That is why the main task of philosophy is enlightenment, teach humanitarian, and Professor Kuchuradi write a lot about human rights, civil society. This is very, very important, more important than 2003 when World Congress was spoke about these ideas. Professor Lucas Carantina says that this World Congress, famous Congress, because many participants, and it's very good, but maybe in next Congresses, we must more give attention to global world, global problems, global community, global thinking, global, thinking globally, and making and communicate together. This is, I think, this is very important. Maybe shortly, no. Thank you for your question.
Sure. I think that's a very interesting question. And what I would say is that observing this process quite directly, at least in the US, the people making global policy basically feel they have nothing to learn from philosophy. They feel that it's either too difficult, too opaque, or it's too utopian, or it isn't conversant with the real challenges and the challenges of managing power and planning security policy. The most intelligent of the diplomats and foreign policy advisors will read philosophy at home or on their vacation time, but they don't think that in the everyday work of their lives that they have anything to learn. Now, if they were here and heard some of the presentations, some would change their mind, because this interest in the global issues is not what most informed people think of when they are told about the relevance of philosophy. And I think this society has challenged that in a very creative and significant way, and I hope it increasingly does that. Let me just say one word to my colleague here about global governance. It's my position, anyway, that global governance exists at the present time, but it's in the hands of the geopolitical actors. It's not, and that was designed to happen when the UN was created. The whole purpose of the veto is to say the UN can't hope to control the most powerful countries in the world. And so we must leave them to act prudently and without the interference of law or institutional regulation. Now that's it turned out to be a naive view, and it contradicts the promise of the preamble to the UN Charter as distinct from the Charter itself. And so one has that tension. What I and others seeking a more stable peace and justice system are seeking is a more humane form of global governance. Because there is the management of power, and there is the action that is characterized by the rivalry between it's not really P5. It's the three NATO powers and China in the middle and Russia on the other side again. And so it's a geopolitical rivalry that tries to establish a war-preventing balance of power. And that's what the global governance system that exists is, and it's urgently necessary that we use our intellect and our energies to create a better one.
Short remarks. Sure. We know very well that every time if we spoke about governance of society, different society, system of society, we need two very important rules. This is ethics and law. Ethics and law. Without ethics and law, we cannot govern of different society. If we speak, if we talk about global system, global law and global ethics. Without global law, global ethics, I can understand how we can manage it. Regulation, yes, but not management, not governance. And we have international law, yes, but global law, no. We have only poor international ethics, international norms, and so on and so on. That is why I say we have no global governance in full sense, of course. But maybe some of aspects, not so many. Thank you very much.
Just one sentence.
Okay, only one sentence.
See, I feel you're confusing you're confusing governance with government. See, and I think there's a different governance, as I and others use it, is the mode of control. It's not necessarily good, not necessarily bad, not necessarily law regulated, but it's what establishes control over the exercise of power in the strategic sense. And the UN doesn't do it.
Okay, if you let me, thank you. It was very interesting, really, this last discussion. But it's time to close, and tomorrow morning we will be again here, 9:30. We are waiting all. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. It's true for you. Thank you very much. Not our society, but certificates. This is for you, for the certificate.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for the books. Good friend of the society. You were always many years. Many years, yeah. I know very well you. Yeah, let me introduce myself. Next.